Hello everyone, this lecture is on the 4 principles that guide our ethics. Those 4 principles are autonomy, beneficence, non-maleficence, and justice. And each of these will be discussed briefly in the slide presentation. The first principle is autonomy, and autonomy means that people should be able to make decisions for themselves. It considers that people should not be coerced or forced into behavior change or changing health behaviors or health measures, that people have the right to informed consent, that they should be able to make their own decisions based on factual information provided to them. People have the right to their medical records, and people have the right to confidentiality or anonymity. And that depends on the situation. Confidentiality means that their names are not shared or any identifiers are not shared. Anonymity means that the people working with the data do not know who is attached to the data. So they're somewhat different. But in autonomy, oftentimes we're looking at, in our public health arena, where we're trying to change behaviors or policies that promote health and wellness, and we have to be cautious that we're not coercing or forcing behavior change, because that would go against the principle of autonomy. The next principle is beneficence, and beneficence means a commitment to do good. In public health, we're often faced with the discussion of what is good for the public versus what is good for the individual. And this is often paired with autonomy. So for example, when seatbelts were put into place and red lights and stop signs were put into place, that decision was based on the benefit to the public over the benefit to the individual, or to the autonomy of the individual. So people cannot just run stop signs because that's their autonomy, and they're not allowed to just not wear seatbelts because of autonomy. And that is because in this country, typically what is good for the public has always been more important than what is the autonomy of the individual. This is also seen in vaccination requirements, in healthy food standards, in food service places, and other areas of public health. The next one is non-maleficence. So beneficence means to do good, and non-maleficence means to do no harm. And these are some areas where we have to examine whether we're doing harm. The release of anonymous or confidential data is likely to cause harm to people, depending on what the data are about. We have to look at individual and public harm. So if we force policy to change water safety in relationship to avoid public harm, that would be an example of non-maleficence. What is criminal law? According to ethical standards, typically public health professionals should not go outside of what criminal law dictates. And the other one is program decisions being negligent. Is the program negligent, or are the decisions made negligent? And negligence is defined as the failure to behave with a level of care that a reasonable person would exercise under the same circumstances. So if a situation happens and the court or public decides that that's not what a normal person would decide to do, that would be considered negligent. A couple of examples of this would be in the medical field, if a healthcare provider chooses not to provide care that the average healthcare provider would provide care, that would be seen as negligence. Another example of possible negligence would be that we know that we have medications that will stop reverse overdose death possibilities. If we choose not to put those into public places and we know that's going to cause harm, that is an example of negligent behavior or potential negligent behavior. And a third one would be if we know medications can prevent death, like medications for diabetes or asthma, and we do not put policies into place to make them accessible to people, could that be seen as negligent? Because a normal person would think it would be appropriate for people to have medications to prevent death. The final of the 4 principles is justice. And justice is the idea that people are treated impartially, fairly, properly, and reasonably. And that is a legal definition of justice. The issue is what people see as impartial, fair, proper, or reasonable. And in this area comes the example of equity versus equality. In equality, everyone gets the exact same thing. In equity, people get what they need. And most people in the health professions agree that health care and health services should be equitable. Health programming should be equitable. Public health should be equitable. So, for example, if a wealthy neighborhood has healthy drinking water, then a less wealthy neighborhood would have healthy drinking water. If certain groups of people have access to health services, then shouldn't all people have access to the health services they need? And so these are examples of justice that is related to public health. So the 4 principles of ethics to review are autonomy, beneficence, non-maleficence, and justice. And those are the basis of ethics in public health and in most health fields. The issue for public health is that there are no clear-cut answers, as has been discussed in this brief video. Sometimes what we seem as good for the public takes away some personal autonomy. Sometimes what we see as just forces changes that produce equitable access to services. So in public health, you're going to find that sometimes these 4 principles do not agree on what would be the outcome based on public health policy or behaviors or programming. So now that you understand, hopefully, or have a better understanding of these 4 principles, it's important to move on and examine the ethics that are generated or promoted in the public health arena.